My name's Lucas. I'm 34 years old, and if there's one thing you should know about me, it's that I learned early on how to be underestimated. I wasn't the golden child. That was my brother Jared. He was this star quarterback, the future CEO, the one with the jawline and charm that made my mom's friends fawn over him at family parties. I was the quiet one, bookish, awkward, more interested in coding JavaScript than throwing a football. While Jared's high school trophies collected dust on the living room shelf, my debate ribbons were stuffed into a shoebox under the stairs. I didn't mind, though. Not at first. I figured one day they'd see me. That if I just worked hard enough, long enough, they'd stop looking through me like I was a ghost at the dinner table. We grew up in Michigan, just outside of Traverse City, where our family had a lake house we'd visit every summer. That place was everything to me. It was the one place I actually felt like I belonged. Quiet mornings on the dock, the gentle creak of the screen door, Dad grilling while Mom fussed about mosquitoes. Jared mostly ignored me out there, but I didn't care. I had the woods, the water, my books, and later, my laptop. It was where I first started building things, websites, dumb little games, then later, tools that actually made people money. I launched my first real software product from that lake house, at 21, on a busted-up folding table with 2 bars of Wi-Fi and a cracked screen. But that house was never mine. My parents made that very clear. It was a family treasure, but really, it belonged to them. And by extension, Jared. They never said it out loud, but you could feel it in the way they talked. When Jared has kids, they'll love the canoe. Or someday, Jared will host 4th of July here. Meanwhile, I was the one actually fixing things. I was the one who rewired the old breaker box when it sparked one winter. I was the one who unclogged the septic tank when we couldn't get a plumber out in time. But when I asked, just once, if I could bring a few friends for a long weekend, Mom wrinkled her nose and said, "That's not really what this house is for, Lucas." Still, I kept showing up. I paid my dues. I took the long drives up north, fixed what needed fixing, mowed the lawn when Dad's back started giving out, and never once asked for anything in return. I didn't even live in Michigan anymore. I was out in Seattle, building my second startup, but I made time to visit, to help, to stay connected. I told myself it was about love, about family. That someday, I'd be part of the conversation. That they'd see me not as the other son, but as someone who mattered. The real shift started about 3 years ago, after Jared moved back home. His marketing agency had collapsed during the pandemic. Something about over-leveraged clients and a botched crypto partnership. He'd burned through his savings and returned to Michigan with his tail tucked between his legs. My parents didn't seem to care. They welcomed him with open arms and zero accountability. He just needs a little time to get back on his feet, Mom told me on the phone, like he hadn't ghosted our family for the past year while living in Miami. When I flew in for Thanksgiving that year, Jared was already living at the lake house full-time. Temporarily, they said. He greeted me at the door like I was an Airbnb guest. Shoes off, we just refinished the floors, he smirked, as if he'd done any of the work. My parents had given him free rein. He'd turned the upstairs office into his gaming room, piled boxes in the guest bedroom where I usually stayed, and started talking about renovation plans, like he already owned the place. I tried to ignore it. I stayed at a hotel, brought a bottle of good Pinot for dinner, and made polite conversation. But something had shifted. The energy was off. At dinner, my dad started asking me what I was really doing with my time. "You're still doing that tech stuff, right? Apps or games, or whatever it is," he asked, waving his fork around like he was shooing away a fly. "It's enterprise software," I said. "We help mid-sized companies automate." "That's nice," he interrupted. "But you're not one of those guys who burns out at 35, right? All hustle, no substance." Jared chuckled. "Yeah, dude. I read this article about how most tech bros crash and burn by the time they hit your age." Mom laughed like it was a joke. "Oh, come on, Jared. Lucas is smart. I'm sure he's got something saved up." Something. Like I wasn't even worth specifics. I clenched my jaw, smiled politely, and took another bite of stuffing. I could have said 1,000 things. I could have told them how my company had just closed its Series B, how we'd hired our 40th employee, how I was flying to Zurich in 2 weeks to speak at a tech conference. But I didn't, because I knew it wouldn't matter. Not to them. Not when it wasn't their definition of success. That Christmas was worse. I arrived late. My flight had been delayed, and I landed in a snowstorm. When I pulled into the driveway at the lake house, there was no spot left for me to park. Jared had 3 cars there, including one shiny new leased BMW he absolutely could not afford. I ended up leaving my rental at the bottom of the hill and trudging up with my suitcase, boots sinking into fresh snow. Inside, it was like walking into someone else's house. Jared's girlfriend, some Instagram model turned wellness coach named Britt, was lighting candles all over the place, even though Dad was allergic to most scents. The living room had been redecorated, with all the rustic furniture I'd grown up with replaced by sleek white couches and gold-framed mirrors. Britt looked me up and down when I entered, didn't even say hi. Just, "Oh, you're Lucas." "Last I checked," I said. She shrugged. "I thought you'd be taller." Dinner was awkward from the start. Jared sat at the head of the table. My dad didn't even question it. The turkey was dry, the wine was cheap, and nobody asked me a single question about my life. Not once. Instead, they fawned over Jared's new consulting business and his plans to scale a content agency through AI. I wanted to laugh. He didn't even know how ChatGPT worked. Then, after dessert, when everyone was full, tipsy, and relaxed, Dad raised his glass. "I've got an announcement," he said, eyes twinkling like he was about to drop the best news in the world. "We've decided. It's time to sell the lake house." A pause. Mom smiled and put her hand on his. "It's been a good run," she added. "But the upkeep, the taxes, it's just too much. And frankly, we'd rather enjoy the money while we still can." I blinked. "Wait, really? You're selling it?" Dad nodded. "We've got a buyer already. Silverpine Ventures. 12 million. All cash." Jared hooped. "That's incredible. Finally, time to get rid of this drafty, old money pit." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Wait, 12 million? Isn't this place appraised at, like, 6? Dad grinned. "Silverpine must really want the location. We're not asking questions. We signed the contract yesterday." Then he turned to me. "And before you ask, no, you're not getting a dime. We're putting it all into a trust for your mother and me. Jared's been helping out a lot lately, so we'll take care of him down the line. But you've got your little business, don't you?" My mouth went dry. The room seemed to spin. "Good," Jared said with a smug nod. "You never deserved it anyway." I stared at them. My parents. My brother. Britt, filing her nails like this was all some reality show. And I felt it. This quiet click in my chest. Like a switch flipping. I set down my wine glass gently, looked Dad in the eye, and said, "Dad, I am Silverpine Ventures." The room fell dead silent. Mom's fork slipped off her plate and clinked against the china. Jared furrowed his brow. "Wait. What?" I smiled, slow and calm. "Yeah, I bought the house." And that's when everything changed. The silence after my words was the kind that presses into your ears, not just from shock, but from something deeper, something unraveling. My mother blinked, lips parted slightly, as if her brain had lagged behind the conversation. Jared let out this incredulous laugh, the kind people make when they think you're lying just to save face. "Yeah, right," he scoffed. "You expect us to believe you have 12 million lying around to drop on a cabin in the woods?" "It's not a cabin," I said quietly. "And yes, I do." Jared looked to Dad like he was expecting backup, but Dad's face was already turning a strange shade, somewhere between red and pale, like he wasn't sure whether to get angry or scared. "That's ridiculous," Mom said finally, forcing a chuckle. "Don't be dramatic, Lucas. This isn't a game." I reached slowly into my coat pocket, pulled out a neatly folded copy of the purchase agreement, one I had printed just in case this exact moment ever happened, and placed it on the table, right beside the cranberry sauce. "Page 3, I said, right above the wire instructions. "Buyer, Silverpine Ventures, LLC. Managing Director, Lucas D. Hartwell." My full name. My signature. Notarized. Dad picked it up with trembling fingers. His eyes scanned it once, then again, then a third time, like the words would magically change if he stared hard enough. "Impossible," he whispered. "It's not," I said. "You signed the documents. You just didn't bother checking who was behind the shell company." It wasn't even hard to pull off. I'd hired a real estate acquisition firm months ago under Silverpine's name. They were instructed to approach Dad as if they were interested in development, something sleek and modern, like lakeside condos. The offer was deliberately outrageous. The team was told to act fast, fly in, flatter him, talk big numbers, lean on phrases like legacy and asset divestment. Dad ate it up. I knew you wouldn't sell it to me directly, I said. You never thought I was worthy of it. Nobody spoke. You could have heard snow falling on the roof. Jared was the first to react, pushing up from the table so fast his chair screeched across the hardwood. No, no. This is bulls. This is a joke. You're messing with us. You're playing some sick game to embarrass Dad. You embarrassed yourselves? I replied. I just made an offer. Mom's eyes were wide now. She looked at Dad, panic in her voice. You said it was a private investor. You said it was some California tech firm. Dad looked genuinely ill. I didn't check. The lawyers handled. You didn't check because you never once considered that I could be behind anything of value, I said, standing now too. My voice was calm, almost quiet, but every word hit like a hammer. You made it crystal clear, year after year, that Jared was the future of this family. I was just the weird one with his head in a screen. But guess what? That screen built me a company with cash on hand, a company that now owns this house. Jared was pacing now, muttering under his breath. He looked at me like I'd grown horns. You seriously bought the house out from under our family, he spat. What kind of selfish, vindictive freak does that? I turned to him fully. The kind who was told his whole life he didn't belong here. The kind who finally decided to stop asking for permission. But that wasn't the end of it, not even close. The next morning, I woke up early and walked out onto the deck, the same deck I'd sat on as a teenager, watching the lake shimmer in the morning sun. Except now it was mine. And yet, even as that thought settled in, I felt a strange weight in my chest, part pride, part grief. This wasn't how I wanted it to be. I didn't want a victory shaped like exile. I made coffee and waited. And sure enough, Jared came stomping into the kitchen around 7 a.m., eyes bloodshot, shirt wrinkled, already seething. You think this changes anything? He said. You really think owning this place makes you family now? I looked at him, mug in hand. No, it just makes me the owner. He slammed his palm against the counter. You're gonna sell it back. You hear me? I'll get Mom and Dad to pool together money. You don't get to take this from us. I raised an eyebrow. From you? Jared, you've been squatting here for free for a year. You haven't paid a cent in property taxes, maintenance, or bills. You treat this place like it's your birthright. It is, he said, almost shouting now. You don't deserve this place. You don't even care about tradition or family. You live in Seattle with your smug little startup and think that makes you better than us. I set the coffee down slowly and walked to the doorway. No, Jared, I said. I don't think I'm better. I think I worked harder. And I stopped waiting for your approval a long time ago. He stared at me, mouth working like he wanted to say something cruel, but couldn't find the words. Then he stormed out. The manipulation started right after breakfast. Mom pulled me aside, her tone syrupy sweet. Lucas, honey, I think there's been a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, I said. You've always been so practical, she continued, ignoring me. Surely you don't actually want to keep the lake house. You live so far away. You'd never use it. It's just sitting here. It should go to someone who can care for it. Someone with family. I didn't respond. I just sipped my coffee. Think about your nieces and nephews, she added, even though Jared didn't have kids yet. Wouldn't you want them to grow up here? Wouldn't you have wanted me to grow up feeling like I belonged here? I replied. She blinked. That's not fair, Lucas. No, I said. It's overdue. By afternoon, it was Dad's turn. He came in from the garage, looking somber. Look, he said, I was surprised last night. I admit that, but I've had some time to think. I suppose I should be proud. I didn't do it for your pride, I said. Still, he said, voice low, this is a serious piece of property. You're going to need help managing it. Insurance, utilities, winterization. I've already hired a property manager, I said, and a lawyer, and a security firm. Everything's covered. He stared at me like he didn't recognize me anymore, like he was still trying to find the old Lucas, the one who stayed quiet, the one who always helped but never asked for anything. That Lucas was gone. The next 2 days were unbearable. Jared started posting passive-aggressive messages on Facebook, hinting about betrayal and greedy siblings. Britt kept whining that the vibes were off. Mom cried quietly over dinner, hoping guilt would work where logic failed. Dad retreated into silence, only emerging to offer bitter, clipped comments about family unity and disappointments. And me? I stayed calm, detached. I went for walks, made quiet calls to my legal team, arranged for renovations to begin in the spring. Because what they didn't know was that the house wasn't the only thing I'd bought. But that part comes later. Right now, the air is thick with tension, and the walls feel like they're closing in. Jared's rage is simmering. My parents are scrambling for control. And me? I'm just watching it unfold. Because I haven't even told them the whole plan yet. And when I do, everything they think they know, everything they cling to, is going to fall apart. It happened on the third night. After the fake smiles, the backhanded comments, the stilted silences that came from a family quietly collapsing in on itself. I decided to stay in the guest room for the last few nights I was visiting, mostly to keep an eye on things, and because, well, technically it was my house now, but also because something didn't feel right. There was this tension in the walls, this low hum of desperation, like the people who used to dismiss me had finally realized I held the only lifeline they had, and they were panicking. That night, I was up late reviewing documents on my laptop when I heard voices in the hallway. It was past midnight, and the floor creaked as someone walked by my door. Then I heard the sound of Jared's voice, low, angry, and someone else. "Dad." I paused my music and listened. "She doesn't trust me," Jared was whispering. "You saw the way she looked at me when I suggested staying through January." "She's just worried about appearances," Dad replied. "Your mother and I will talk to her. You can stay as long as you need." "I'm not going to be homeless, Dad. I put everything into that agency. And now he's acting like he's the king of the castle." A pause. "You promised," Jared said, voice shaking. "I know," Dad sighed. "And we're going to fix it. Just let me handle it. Lucas has always been soft. He'll come around if we press the right buttons." Soft. That word stayed with me like a hook in my ribs. But it was what I heard next that changed everything. "You got the copies, right?" Jared asked. "Yeah," Dad said. "They're in the study." "Good. He's flying out Monday. That gives us 2 days." I didn't know what copies they were talking about, but I knew that tone. The whisper of a plan being made behind my back. It had the same venom as all the other times they made decisions without me. Like when they sold my childhood bike in a garage sale without asking. Or when they forgot to tell me they refinanced the lake house and put Jared's name on the deed, something I only discovered later when I requested public records during my acquisition process. That's how I'd found out Jared had been on the title for a short time, until they removed him to make the sale go through smoothly. They didn't even ask why the buyer wanted it in cash. They were too busy counting imaginary money. Now they were planning something again. I waited until the hallway was silent, then crept out of my room and padded barefoot down the stairs. The study door was closed, but not locked. Inside, the light was still on. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place. The same old leather chair, the cluttered desk, the antique lamp Mom refused to get rid of because it was your grandfather's. But when I checked the bottom drawer, I saw it. A folder, thick, labeled in Jared's handwriting. Plan B. Inside were half-printed documents, some fake, some clearly drafted with a lawyer. There was an unsigned affidavit claiming I'd lied about my identity to acquire the property. Another one said I'd used manipulative tactics to coerce an elderly couple into selling their generational home under false pretenses. There was even a fake email exchange, supposedly between me and a real estate fixer, where I bragged about tricking some boomer into giving up his precious lake house. My mouth went dry. They weren't just planning to guilt-trip me. They were planning to sue me. Or at least threaten to sue me. Jared must have dug through my social media, scraped together enough data to make fake screenshots. The whole folder was a bluff, but one designed to weaponize my silence. To scare me. To make me back off. I sat back on my heels, folder in hand, staring at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. This wasn't just manipulation. This was war. When I confronted them the next morning, the performance they put on was Oscar-worthy. I waited until we were all seated at the breakfast table, eggs, toast, the usual, then placed the folder right in front of Jared's plate. "You left this in the study," I said casually. He froze. Dad stiffened. Mom blinked like she didn't know what she was looking at. "What's that?" she asked, reaching for it. Jared snatched it before she could touch it. "Just some notes," he said. "Old files." I tilted my head. "Notes about what? Your fake lawsuit? The one where I apparently scammed you out of a house I legally bought. You were spying on us?" Dad barked. "You were conspiring against me," I said, rising from the table. "This isn't about real estate anymore. This is about control." Mom finally found her voice. "Lucas, You're being paranoid. Nobody is trying to hurt you. I laughed. Actually laughed. Really? Then what's this? I pulled out one of the fake emails. This one says I bragged about tricking you. Want to tell me who wrote that? Because I didn't. And it's timestamped 3 days before I even made the offer. Dad stood, chest puffed out. That's enough. You've made your point. We were just trying to protect what's ours. What's yours? I asked. You mean my house? His jaw clenched. This house has been in our family for generations, he said. You don't get to swoop in with money and take it like a thief. You sold it, I said. No gun to your head. No trick. You sold it because you thought I was beneath you. That landed. Even Mom winced. I gave you every chance to be part of this family, I continued. Every time you ignored my achievements. Every time you made Jared the favorite, even when he was drowning in debt. Every time you needed help, and I came anyway. And this is how you repay me. Silence. I'm not soft anymore, I added. So here's what's going to happen. You've got 48 hours to vacate. And if I find one more forged document, I will press charges for fraud. You wouldn't, Jared spat. I smiled. Cold, quiet, and final. I would. And I'll win. He threw his fork across the room. It clattered to the ground like a shot fired in a dead room. Britt let out a little gasp and bolted from the table. Mom reached for Jared's hand, but he pulled away, red-faced, humiliated. I turned and left the room. That was the day I stopped being their son in their eyes and started being a threat. But what they didn't know yet, what I hadn't told them, is that this house was only one part of the web I'd been quietly spinning. And the next move would shatter whatever illusion of control they still had. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It wasn't even the fake lawsuit or the lies they were willing to put to paper to make me look like a predator. I could deal with betrayal. I'd been dealing with it in quiet doses my whole life. Brushed off in conversations, excluded from family photos, treated like an afterthought, while Jared basked in unconditional applause. No, the worst part was the moment I realized I had hoped, deep down, despite everything, that this would be different. That maybe, just maybe, this one would make them see me. I thought that if I pulled off something big enough, smart enough, clean enough, undeniable, they'd finally stop pretending like I didn't belong. That they'd look at me the way they looked at Jared at his high school graduation, or when he announced he was opening his own agency. Like they were proud. But instead, they saw a threat, and treated me like one. After the breakfast confrontation, the house turned cold. Not literally, though it was the middle of December, but in the way people spoke, or didn't. The next 24 hours were suffocating. Nobody made eye contact. Jared started locking the bedroom door he and Britt were staying in, like I was going to storm in and throw them out myself. Mom tiptoed around me, clinging to an apron she didn't need to wear, offering tea with a forced smile and glassy eyes. Dad stopped speaking entirely unless it was to bark orders about the thermostat or grumble to himself while standing outside in the snow. I spent most of those hours in the upstairs den. It was the only place left in the house that still felt untouched, where the old pine shelves still held my childhood books, where the draft under the window hadn't been patched for years. I curled up in the same old armchair I used to sit in when I was 13, legs now far too long to fold comfortably underneath me, and stared at the fireplace. It had been years since anyone had lit it. That night, I tried calling someone. Just someone who might understand. I dialed Mia, my old college roommate turned best friend. She'd been with me since the first startup, through all the long nights and ramen dinners, back when I still coded everything by hand, and we used duct tape to hold up whiteboards. She answered on the second ring, her voice groggy from the time difference. "You okay?" she asked immediately. I didn't answer right away. I finally said. "I bought the house for all the wrong reasons." She was quiet for a second. Then, "Talk to me." So I did. I told her everything. How I'd built Silverpine in secret, funneled the deal through acquisition firms so Dad wouldn't know it was me. How I'd poured months into the logistics just for that one moment of poetic justice. And how now, after finally pulling it off, it all felt hollow. "They were never going to accept you, Lou," she said gently. "You know that, right?" I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I thought if I played their game better than they ever did, I trailed off. But they just keep moving the goalposts. That's because they were never going to let you win. You were always just a placeholder for their disappointment. We stayed on the line for another hour. She didn't tell me what to do. She didn't have to. Just hearing someone see me, really see me, was enough to keep the grief from swallowing me whole. Because that's what it was, really. Grief. Grief for the family I thought I could still have. Grief for the boy who used to carry a toolbox to fix broken steps on the deck, hoping someone would say thank you. Grief for the man who built an empire just to be noticed at a dinner table. The next morning, I didn't go downstairs. I stayed in the den, opened my laptop, and started making lists. Real, concrete, brutal lists. Eviction logistics. Timelines. Legal contingencies. Asset tracing. I tried to play nice. I gave them time. I gave them dignity. But they'd crossed a line. Still, I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to throw dishes or slam doors or do anything they could twist into another reason to paint me as unstable. I'd been the ghost in the house long enough to know how power worked in silence. So I did what I do best. I started planning. First, I called my lawyer, Melinda, a whip-smart real estate attorney who didn't flinch at family drama. I explained the documents I found, sent her photos, gave her access to the shared folders I'd already created in anticipation of trouble. She confirmed my instincts. These documents aren't just fake, they're sloppy. If they try to file anything using these, we counter with fraud and defamation. I'll get a restraining order drafted if needed. Second, I reviewed the sale terms again. Buried deep in the contract, thanks to a clause I'd insisted on, was the residency rider. All previous occupants were to vacate within 72 hours of sale unless a formal lease was signed. I'd extended that window to be generous. They were now on hour 62. No lease. No agreement. Just squatters with good winter coats. Third, I forwarded a private message to my property management firm. Subject: January transition. In it, I detailed the plan to begin renovations in January. Full gut of the basement. Structural inspection. Rewiring. A second-floor studio. The works. They'd need the property cleared. Jared wouldn't be thrilled. I started organizing digital folders, filing everything by category. Legal, communication, contracts, photos. My lawyer would be pleased. This wasn't just business now. It was protection. By mid-afternoon, Mom tried again. She came to the den, tray in hand. Tea, biscuits, a sad little cloth napkin folded into a triangle. Just wanted to talk, she said softly. I didn't invite her to sit, but she did anyway. You know, she started, voice trembling. We only did what we thought was best for you boys. Stop, I said, without raising my voice. Don't rewrite it. You didn't do what was best. You did what was easiest. Jared was loud and shiny, and I was quiet and inconvenient. So you backed the son who made you feel proud in public. Her hands trembled around the tray. I never stopped loving you, she said. I never said you did, I replied. But love without respect is just guilt with a smile. That silenced her. I didn't kick her out of the room. She left on her own after a minute, eyes watery, mouth pressed into a thin line. And I just kept working. Because this was what I did best, building from the wreckage, turning broken pieces into systems, blueprints, power. But I won't lie. That night, when the house was quiet and I sat alone in the den, staring out at the frozen lake, I cried. Not loud, not long, but deep. The kind of cry that knots your chest and doesn't let go. Because no matter how much money you make, no matter how many victories you earn, being unwanted by the people who made you hurts. Still, I wiped my face, and I kept planning, because soon, very soon, the storm would break. And when it did, I would be ready. The sun rose slowly the next morning, casting a pale orange glow across the frozen lake. I stood at the window, coffee in hand, watching the light stretch across the water like it was reclaiming something. The den was quiet, the house even quieter. It was the final full day of their 72-hour grace period. They didn't know it yet, but today marked the end of whatever fantasy they'd been clinging to, the one where they still held the reins. I'd spent the night finalizing every detail. The locksmith was scheduled for Monday morning, just after their time expired. The property manager would arrive shortly after to assess the place. My legal team had reviewed every clause in the contract and prepared a formal notice of possession. Everything was lined up. But beyond the legal logistics, something else had shifted. I had shifted. Something in me had gone still. Not dead, not cold, but quiet. Grounded. A part of me, the part that had always wanted to be chosen, to be accepted, had finally stepped back. And in its place was something stronger, clarity. I didn't need them anymore. And strangely, That realization didn't hurt, it freed me. I left the house just after sunrise. Drove into town, down roads I hadn't seen in years. Traverse City had changed. Sleeker restaurants, boutique coffee shops, a new co-working space where an old hardware store used to be. I parked and walked into a quiet cafe I used to visit back in college. The barista was different, but the smell was the same: bitter espresso, faint cinnamon. I ordered my usual black coffee with a splash of cream and found a seat near the window. Then I opened my laptop and got to work. While my family wallowed in confusion and passive-aggressive silence back at the house, I was signing a six-figure contract with a European logistics firm to license our enterprise dashboard software. They had dozens of warehouses and were hemorrhaging money due to inefficiencies. Silverpine's newest product would solve that. We'd been negotiating for months. This morning, it closed. An hour later, I got a Slack message from our CFO. "Kayla, just hit $10 million in ARR. Want me to draft the investor update?" Me. "Let's wait until Monday. I have another surprise coming." Because that wasn't the only deal in play. The night before, after I hung up with Mia, she connected me with a regional developer group in Michigan. They'd been eyeing lakefront property for a luxury boutique resort, a sustainable, minimalist lodge designed for year-round wellness retreats. Normally, I wouldn't have considered it. But after reading their pitch, I realized something. The lake house could be more than a monument to my family's selfishness. It could become a legacy of my own choosing. The developers didn't want to gut the house. They wanted to preserve it, just upgrade it, expand the dock, build an eco-friendly spa, and a few small cabins down the slope. A blend of old and new. They even offered to name the retreat after the property's original name, Hartwell Point. They had no idea who I was when we spoke. By noon, I had a preliminary agreement in my inbox. It would mean demolishing Jared's gaming room and the guest suite he'd claimed as a personal kingdom. It would mean gutting the kitchen Mom always boasted about, but never really used. It would mean wiping away the last fingerprints of their dominance. I clicked accept. When I returned to the lake house later that afternoon, I found Jared sitting on the couch in the living room, laptop open, typing furiously. Britt wasn't there. Apparently, she'd left that morning after a loud argument that shook the upstairs hallway. Something about how she wasn't going to freeze in this depressing house with a bunch of losers. Not even Jared could charm his way out of her exit. Mom was in the kitchen, red-eyed, pretending to rearrange the spice rack. Dad wasn't home. He'd driven into town early and hadn't come back yet. But his truck was still in the driveway, which meant he was likely off somewhere licking his wounds. I didn't care. I was done offering space to people who only saw me when it suited them. Jared looked up as I entered, eyes bloodshot. "You're gonna regret this." "No," I said. "You are." He slammed his laptop shut. "You think you're the good guy in this? You bought your way into a house you were never meant to own. You think that makes you powerful? It just makes you a snake in a suit." I tilted my head. "You want to talk about snakes? I have the forged documents. The fake emails. A lawyer who's already filed them with a time-stamped record. If I wanted, I could sue you into the next decade. But I haven't. Yet." His mouth opened, closed. He looked lost, like he couldn't understand how the rules had changed without his permission. "You don't belong here," he mumbled. "I own here," I said. I walked past him, set my laptop on the dining room table, and called the property manager on speaker. "Hey, Tanya. Just confirming the walkthrough on Monday." Her voice came through, clear and professional. "Yes, 9 a.m. sharp. Locks will be changed by 10. Crew arrives by noon." I turned toward Jared, made sure he heard every word. "Perfect," I said. "Let's bring this place into the 21st century." He stormed out, muttering curses under his breath. I didn't follow him. I had too much to do. Over the weekend, I finalized the retreat proposal. I spoke with architects, environmental consultants, and local contractors. I looped in my assistant to coordinate timelines, tax filings, and city permits. And on Sunday evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, I opened the email from my CPA confirming what I already suspected. Silverpine Ventures now held $13.7 million in retained earnings. Enough to fund the renovation. Enough to expand. Enough to buy out the neighboring plot that my father once joked about, but never had the guts to pursue. It wasn't just a lake house anymore. It was a headquarters, a statement, a reclaiming. That night, I poured a glass of scotch, stepped out onto the deck, and breathed in the sharp winter air. Below me, The lake was silent, frozen, and still. The stars shimmered in the sky above, clearer than I remembered. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was focused, because soon, the hammer would fall, and everything they built on favoritism and lies would crack. By Monday morning, the temperature had dropped below freezing. A heavy fog rolled in from the lake, blanketing the trees in a soft, bone-white mist. The house looked almost peaceful, like something out of a postcard. But inside, the walls were tight with tension. It was 8:55 a.m. I stood by the front door, dressed in a dark wool coat, a folder of legal papers in one hand and a mug of coffee in the other. The locksmith's van pulled into the driveway right on time. Right behind it, Tanya's SUV crunched over the frozen gravel. She stepped out with a clipboard in one hand and a Bluetooth earpiece in the other, dressed like someone who'd evicted 5 people before noon. Jared came down the stairs still half asleep, hair a mess, sweatpants twisted. He froze when he saw Tanya and the locksmith unloading gear. "What is this?" he barked. "Notice of possession," I said, handing him a printed copy with my signature and a timestamp from the county clerk's office. "You've overstayed your grace period. You're kicking me out." His voice cracked like a teenager's. "Are you serious right now?" "Very," I said. "The locks will be changed within the hour. Tanya's team will begin the initial inspection and renovation prep this afternoon. You'll want to be out before then." "You're unbelievable," he snapped. "You think money makes you untouchable?" "No," I replied calmly. "But contracts do." I turned my back on him and walked outside. The cold bit at my skin, but I didn't care. I stood beside Tanya as the locksmith worked, the clinks and whirs of his tools echoing off the front porch. "Don't worry," she said. "We've handled worse. This'll be smooth." And it was. Jared had packed hastily, probably assuming he'd come back later once I cooled off. He didn't yet understand that this wasn't a tantrum. This was a chess match, and he was already 3 moves behind. By noon, the locks were changed. By 2 p.m., Tanya's team had walked every inch of the house, documenting damage, marking walls with blue tape, and preparing contractor access. By 4, I was alone again. But I wasn't finished, because while they'd been clinging to the past, I'd been building something far bigger. Silverpine had been growing quietly for the past 4 years, steady, intentional, out of the spotlight. We didn't chase press or flashy investments. We just built tools that worked. We didn't need a viral moment. We just needed time. And now, with our ARR crossing 8 figures and our latest software solution about to enter closed beta for Fortune 500 clients, we were no longer a small player. But here's the part that matters. Silverpine wasn't just a tech company. I'd spent the last 18 months transforming it into something else, a holding company, quietly acquiring assets, real estate, dormant LLCs, and shell corporations that held strategic value. Not because I needed more money, but because I'd learned something important from watching my family. Power isn't in what you own. It's in what people don't know you own. Take the property next to the lake house, for instance. Jared always joked about it, called it the junk yard, because it was overgrown, filled with rusted-out trailers and an abandoned boathouse. He used to shoot bottle rockets across the property line just to annoy the owner. The guy who lived there was a recluse, paranoid, always threatening lawsuits over trespassing. 2 months ago, I bought it, through a shell company. The deal closed in cash. The old man finally agreed after I offered him 30% over market value and covered his moving expenses to Florida. My lawyer even helped set him up with a new mobile home. The moment I got the deed, I had my development team fly in and drone skin the entire lot. The soil was clean. The slope was perfect for runoff. And most importantly, it came with water rights Jared never knew existed. Because of those water rights, I now controlled access to the dock and the inlet that fed the entire lake's boating route. Why does that matter? Because the local marina's lease was up in 8 months, and they depended on that inlet. I'd already started negotiations to purchase the marina's land outright and move operations to a newly designed private dock, one that would be built right behind the lake house on my shoreline. I wasn't just reclaiming the property. I was rerouting the economy around it. A week later, my assistant confirmed the LLC paperwork was finalized for Hartwell Point Retreats, a luxury eco-resort that would include wellness cabins, a spa, a private marina, and a smart conference center outfitted with Silverpine's AI tools. It would be sleek, discreet, high-ticket, and every guest would pass under a sign with my last name carved into the frame. The kicker? The local tourism board had reached out earlier that day. They wanted to feature the project in their spring promotion. Said they were thrilled a Michigan native was reinvesting in the community. They asked if I'd do a brief interview. I hadn't even told them my real last name yet. That night, I sat alone in the upstairs study, my study now, and opened an old memory box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were photos. Me and Jared at the lake as kids. Dad grilling shirtless. Mom sunbathing with a magazine. There was even a Polaroid of me with a fish I caught when I was 7, beaming with pride. On the back, in Mom's handwriting, Jared helped him bait the hook. He hadn't. I'd done it myself. Even my memories had been rewritten. But now, I was the one writing the story. And the final chapter was coming. Because just yesterday, Jared made one last mistake. He went to our uncle. Uncle Ray was the executor of my grandparents' trust, a man I hadn't spoken to in years, but who always seemed to orbit the family drama like a distant planet. Jared had called him to complain about my power trip, hoping to rally sympathy. Instead, Uncle Ray called me. Turns out, there was one asset left in the trust that hadn't been distributed, a plot of land just south of the lake, left to the most responsible heir. Uncle Ray had been watching quietly for years. After our call, he said simply, "I think I've made up my mind. He's transferring the deed to me next week." I thanked him. I didn't gloat. I didn't brag. I just thanked him. Because sometimes, revenge isn't about destruction. Sometimes, it's about inheritance. And now I had everything I needed. The house, the land, the access, the legacy. It began with an envelope. Cream-colored, heavy paper. My initials embossed in silver on the flap, LDH. Simple, elegant, deliberate. Inside, formal letters addressed to each member of the family, Mom, Dad, and Jared, on Silverpine Ventures letterhead. The tone was professional, detached. No insults, no emotion, just truth wrapped in legal formality. I'd spent weeks fine-tuning every word with my legal team, carefully choosing language that couldn't be misread or manipulated. They were hand-delivered on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, while they were still reeling from the eviction and pretending like they had a case to build. I made sure to have them signed for proof of receipt. Each letter detailed the final terms. Immediate forfeiture of all keys, access codes, and possessions left on site. Anything not claimed by Friday would be considered abandoned and donated or destroyed. Notification of property renovation and zoning changes. The home was to be remodeled into a boutique retreat and corporate innovation center. All sentimental items removed during demo would be stored for 60 days. After that, disposed of at my discretion. Permanent ban from hosting or residing at the property without prior written invitation. Trespassing would result in legal action. Surveillance was already installed. An addendum listing a cease and desist warning. Any future slander, threats, or attempts to contact my company's investors or partners would trigger immediate legal response. Jared received his last. I asked Tanya's assistant to personally hand it to him in the lobby of the co-working space, where he was pretending to rebuild his career. She said he went pale as he read it, then muttered something about lawyers bluffing before storming out. But that was just phase 1. Phase 2 started the next week, quietly, efficiently. I called Uncle Ray and confirmed the final paperwork for the southern plot was signed and recorded. The land wasn't worth much on its own, just a patch of forest with no view, but it sat on the only viable road leading into the lake house property. And with my newly updated zoning rights from the county, I now had full control over road access. Then, I purchased the easement rights for the old trailhead that led to the public dock, an often overlooked detail in local property law. Jared had used that route his entire life, believing it belonged to the state. It didn't. It was privately owned, now by me, and I closed it. Legally. Signs went up the next day, private road. No through access. Violators will be prosecuted. I even installed a gate. When Jared came storming back, red-faced and furious, shouting at the crew laying concrete foundations for the new cabins, they didn't flinch. They simply handed him a laminated copy of the trespassing ordinance and asked him to step off-site. He tried calling my cell. I let it ring. He tried texting. I blocked him. He emailed. I forwarded it to Melinda, who responded with a perfectly worded cease and desist and a single closing sentence. Mr. Hartwell no longer wishes to engage. Meanwhile, my parents tried their own angle. Mom sent a long, rambling letter, half apology, half guilt trip, about memories and family history and how she hoped I'd reconsider selling out to strangers. She included old photos. One of them was of me, sitting on the porch steps when I was 10, holding a fishing pole too big for my frame. Jared stood beside me, smiling like he'd caught the fish himself. On the back, Mom had written, "Together, always." I returned the letter unopened. Instead, I had a professional photographer shoot updated images of the newly cleared lot, the dock expansion, the foundation being poured for the wellness cabins. The photos were stunning, sunlight reflecting off the water, snow glittering across the beams, crisp, modern lines rising out of the earth. I uploaded the best one to the Silverpine Ventures investor update page with a headline, "Hartwell Point Innovation Center, Phase 1 begins." Then I scheduled the press release. A week later, the article hit the local paper. It was a full feature. Local tech founder transforms historic property into flagship retreat. They quoted me sparingly but respectfully, mentioned my Michigan roots, my desire to reinvest in the community, how the space would include eco-lodges, private retreats, and a state-of-the-art leadership lab for high-growth startups. The article went viral in the region. Everyone who had ignored me growing up suddenly wanted to shake my hand. Meanwhile, Jared's agency, his latest attempt at a comeback, was buried in debt. Turns out the investor he'd been bragging about ghosted him after one bad quarter. His clients, many of whom operated near the lake, were suddenly uncomfortable working with a guy banned from the region's most high-profile development. One even reached out to Silverpine directly, asking if we offered digital strategy consulting. I said we didn't, but I gave them the number of a young, up-and-coming firm we'd quietly invested in 2 months earlier, a firm I now partly owned. They got the contract, and Jared got nothing. Dad tried to salvage his reputation too. Started telling people at the golf club that he'd sold the house to his son as a favor, that it was always the plan, that he was proud. Then someone showed them the article and the quote from the developer. We were thrilled when Mr. Hartwell approached us about the land. The family had no idea who we represented until after closing. The lie unraveled. Fast. People started asking questions. And the truth, quiet, undeniable, began to spread. At one point, a former neighbor texted me a photo, Dad standing in his driveway, alone, snow falling around him, staring across the frozen lake. No caption. He looked small, smaller than I'd ever seen him. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt done. I'd spent a lifetime waiting for recognition, waiting for fairness. I realized I'd been chasing something they were never capable of giving. But now I didn't need it. Because they could no longer rewrite the story. They could no longer say he was just the quiet one, or he never really did much, or thank God Jared was around to help. No. Now, when people looked at the lake house, they saw me. My vision. My name. My power. And that was enough. The fallout didn't happen all at once. It came slowly, like water seeping into the cracks of a foundation, quiet, steady, and utterly unstoppable. 3 weeks after the press release, my mother sent a formal letter through her attorney requesting a compassionate reconsideration of the trespass restrictions. She wrote that she was struggling with the loss of the lake house and hoped I'd find it in my heart to allow visitation, at least during holidays. I didn't reply. Instead, my lawyer did. She reminded them that the property was now zoned commercial, not residential. That visitation rights didn't apply. That any future attempts to visit without written consent would violate both trespassing laws and a standing civil protection order filed in response to their prior attempts to falsify legal documents. Mom never wrote again. Dad, on the other hand, couldn't let it go. He tried spinning the story at his country club, claiming that I had pressured them into selling, that I'd tricked them with fine print. But no one bought it. Not after the local paper did a follow-up story on me. This time covering the impact the retreat was having on local job creation, the sustainability grants we'd applied for, the partnerships with tech incubators and mental health programs. A community center donated in my name was already under construction on the south lot. The town had moved on, but Dad hadn't. He came by the property one last time, uninvited. I was on site, overseeing the installation of the new glass-paneled dock when security radioed me. There's a man trying to get past the gate. Says he's your father. I told them to escort him out. Calmly, respectfully. I didn't go down to see him. Later that night, I reviewed the security footage. There he was, standing at the gate in a worn flannel coat, older than I remembered, eyes glassy. He stared through the bars for nearly 10 minutes, not saying a word, not shouting, just staring. Then he turned and left. Jared spiraled faster. Word had gotten out about the forged legal documents. A small-time blogger picked up the story, how he'd tried to fabricate evidence to reverse the property sale. The article didn't gain national traction, but it made the rounds locally. Just enough for potential clients to Google his name and decide, maybe not. His agency shut down 2 months later. He moved back in with our parents. I heard, through mutuals, that Britt was pregnant, but not with Jared's kid. She'd left him weeks before that letter was delivered and had already moved in with a dentist from Kalamazoo. I didn't feel pity. I felt distance. Clean, sharp, unbreakable distance. Because while they were unraveling, I was rising. The retreat opened that summer. The reviews were glowing. Hartwell Point became a haven for CEOs, artists, therapists, and thinkers. A place where people came to reset. The Smart Conference Center hosted industry roundtables. The eco cabins booked out months in advance. The private dock hosted yoga at sunrise and strategy sessions by moonlight. And I stayed in the main house. My house. Renovated. Modernized. Reclaimed. One morning, I sat on the deck with Mia, sipping coffee as the lake glistened in the sun. She smiled, watching a group of guests kayak across the still water. "You did it," she said. I nodded. "Took me long enough." She tilted her head. "Do you miss them?" I thought about it. About the birthdays ignored, the praise reserved for Jared, the jokes made at my expense, the years I wasted waiting for people to see me. Then I shook my head. "No," I said. "They never existed. Not really. Just the version of them I wish they were." She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. We sat in silence, letting the morning stretch around us. And then, like fate couldn't resist one last flourish, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. A photo. Jared, Dad, and Mom, standing outside a weathered suburban home I didn't recognize. The yard was patchy, the siding dull. A half-hearted "for sale" sign leaned sideways in the grass. Underneath it, just 3 words. "Hope you're happy." I looked at it for a moment. Then I deleted it. I stood, walked to the edge of the deck, and stared out across the water. The lake was still. The house was quiet. And for the first time in my life, so was I.